In my past life, I was a legal shark. After working myself to death, I was reborn with my memories intact. While other toddlers made mud pies, I begged my dad for life insurance. While other kids rebelled, I dragged my family to a notary to secure my property rights. But my adoptive parents were painfully honest, even writing IOUs for borrowed sugar. For 18 years, my legal strategies gathered dust. Just as I embraced my comedic fate, a powerful family appeared, claiming I was their lost daughter. The imposter, Celeste, clung to the matriarch's arm. At their mansion, they slid a severance agreement toward me. Sign this for $5 million. Don't get ideas. Celeste Fate cried, I'm sorry, Nina. They're just protecting me. As they watched with contempt, I calmly pulled out a voice recorder and a countersuit. Severing ties is fine. First, pay 18 years of child support, emotional damages, and identity theft compensation. Let's call it $800 million.
Oh.
And I've already frozen the company's assets. Until this lawsuit ends, you won't touch a cent. This is the final mediation before the hearing. Are you sure you want to proceed? I leaned back in my chair, observing the family of 3 seated on the sofa across from me. No, a family of 4. My so-called brother, Connor, was glaring at me with murder in his eyes. The man who had spoken was Mr. Sterling, the Delacourt family's chief legal counsel. He adjusted his gold-rimmed glasses, his tone dripping with a condescending charity. Ms. Lynn, Mr. Delacourt is willing to increase the compensation to $50 million and purchase a villa for your adoptive mother. This is our final, most sincere offer. All you have to do is drop the lawsuit and issue a public statement admitting this was all a misunderstanding. I smiled. Mr. Sterling, how many years have you been practicing law? He blinked, caught off guard. 15. Then you must be familiar with the criminal code regarding felony child abandonment? I slowly sat up straight, my gaze sweeping over the family, their expressions shifting. When circumstances are heinous, resulting in serious injury or death, the sentence is no less than 5 years in prison. The day I was thrown in a dumpster, it was below freezing. If it weren't for my adoptive parents, I would have been dead from hypothermia within 24 hours. Tell me, Mr. Sterling, I said, my voice dangerously soft. Wouldn't you consider that heinous? The color drained from his face. The patriarch of the Delacourt family, my biological father, Julian Delacourt, finally spoke. Is that a threat? His voice was deep, heavy with the authority of a man used to being in charge. It's not a threat. I took out my phone and played a recording. Sign this and $5 million is yours. Don't get any ideas about things that don't belong to you. It was the first thing my biological mother, Isabel, had said to me. I hit pause. This is evidence of your admitted attempt to sever our relationship with a paltry sum, a threat which caused me secondary emotional distress. As for the $800 million, I glanced at my assistant, who immediately handed me a thick file. This is a calculation of your family's average annual income based on Delacourt Enterprises' financial reports for the last 18 years. By law, the child support you owe is the sum total of all living, educational, and medical expenses enjoyed by Celeste during the time I was missing. Add in emotional damages and identity appropriation compensation, and $800 million is already a steep discount. Oh, and by the way, I said, waving another document, this is the court order to freeze your assets. Until this lawsuit is settled, you won't be moving a penny from your corporate accounts. Julian Delacourt's face turned thunderous. Beside him, Celeste was sobbing, her face a mess of tears. Nina, why are you doing this? Where family shut up, my gaze turned to her cold as ice, illegally occupying someone else's identity for 18 years for immense personal gain. You'll be receiving a second lawsuit from me shortly. Celeste's crying stopped abruptly. She stared at me in disbelief. You're insane, a complete lunatic, my brother Connor shouted, leaping to his feet and pointing a finger at me. How could the Delacourt family produce someone as cold-blooded as you, suing your own parents for money? I met his furious gaze, my own expression perfectly calm. You're wrong. I'm not suing you for money. I'm suing you to teach you the meaning of the law. Connor, sit down, Julian barked, silencing his enraged son. But the look he gave me was just as venomous. Let's talk. That was the language of the weaker party at a negotiation table. I gestured for him to proceed. Mr. Sterling cleared his throat, trying to regain control. Ms. Lin, there's no need to burn bridges. You're a young woman with a long future ahead of you. It's unwise to be so absolute. I ignored him, my eyes fixed on Isabel, my impeccably preserved mother. Since I had walked in, she'd been watching me with a complex mix of disappointment, disgust, and a sliver of fear. Mrs. Delacourt, 18 years ago today, you gave birth to me in a hospital. Her body gave a slight, almost imperceptible flinch. You experienced the joy of motherhood while I was waiting to die in a dumpster. For 18 years, Celeste wore princess dresses, attended the best international schools, and grew up surrounded by your love. Meanwhile, I wore hand-me-downs from the market and collected plastic bottles for a week to afford a few dollars for school supplies. I paused, watching her eyes well up with tears. I felt nothing. So, you're hoping to make up for those 18 years with tears? Isabel's voice was choked. I didn't know. I didn't know you suffered so much. You didn't know? I laughed as if it were the funniest joke in the world. You didn't look for me out of guilt. You looked for me because of Celeste's marriage prospects. I pulled 2 photos from my file and tossed them on the table. One was of Celeste cozying up to a young, wealthy heir. The other was the heir's medical report, highlighting a rare genetic disorder. The Zhou family needed a healthy heiress to marry into their family and continue their precious bloodline. Unfortunately for you, Celeste's medical exam didn't pass. So you remembered me, your backup, didn't you? Julian's pupils contracted. Isabel's sobs died in her throat. Connor's face was a mask of shock. Even Mr. Sterling looked surprised. How did you know? Connor blurted out. Secrets have a way of coming out. I leaned back, calmly adjusting my cuffs. You thought my adoptive parents in that small town were simple country folk?
Wrong.
My father is a retired criminal detective, and my mother was an archivist. Your half-baked private investigations were like child's play to me. That was the first surprise I had in store for them. My adoptive parents were indeed humble, but their professional skills were my ace in the hole now, I said, my gaze landing on Julian. Let's talk about sincerity. I don't just want the money, I want a public, full-page apology in every major newspaper admitting to the abandonment of your daughter and the deliberate confusion of your bloodline. Never. Julian slammed his hand on the table, trembling with rage. Then I'll see you in court. I stood up to leave.
Wait.
Julian stopped me, taking a deep breath to control his fury. The apology is negotiable. And the money, we can discuss it. But you must guarantee that this ends here. I looked at him and smiled. Mr. Delacourt, you still don't get it. I'm the one in charge now. The Delacourts, as expected, fought back. The next day, the internet was flooded with stories about me. Hashtag real-life Viper. Heiress returns home. Demands $800 million from saviors. Hashtag greed personified. Poor girl sues own parents for fortune. Hashtag. The articles painted me as a manipulative, bitter girl from the countryside, warped by poverty. They used a photo of me in a washed-out school uniform, eating at a cheap street stall. Juxtaposed with it was an elegant photo of Celeste in a couture gown, playing piano at a charity gala. The stark contrast immediately ignited the internet's righteous fury. Is this woman insane? 800 million? Why doesn't she just rob a bank? Her real parents come back to give her a life of luxury, and she bites the hand that feeds her. What an ungrateful snake. I feel so bad for the fake daughter. Her identity was stolen, and now she has to deal with this monster. Soon after, Celeste gave a video interview to a major news outlet. On camera, her eyes were red and swollen, her face pale. Her voice was as fragile as a feather. I don't blame my sister, she whispered. She must have had a very hard life. She's just not thinking clearly. The money, the status. I don't want any of it. I just want my sister to come home so we can be a family. She covered her face, breaking down into heart-wrenching sobs. Her performance of magnanimous victimhood won her the sympathy of the entire country. The hashtag Celeste Angel trended at #1. My phone blew up with hateful, threatening messages. Red paint was thrown on my adoptive parents' front door, with vicious words like "get out of the city" scrawled across it. My mother's blood pressure skyrocketed, leaving her bedridden. My father silently scrubbed the paint off the door, the veins on the back of his hands bulging. The Delacourt's media blitz was swift and brutal. They thought that by turning me into a public enemy, they could force me to surrender. Connor called me, his voice dripping with triumphant glee. "See that, Nina? This is what happens when you cross the Delacourts. I suggest you drop the suit and apologize. Otherwise, I guarantee you and your pauper parents will never be able to show your faces in public again." I listened to his tirade, feeling nothing but a cold calm. "Is that so?" I said. "We'll see about that." I hung up and dialed another number. "Hello, is this Ms. Zhang?" "This is Nina Lin." "Yes, I'd like to hold a press conference." "The location?" "Right in front of the Delacourt Enterprises headquarters." "Time?" "Tomorrow at 10 a.m. And Ms. Zhang, make sure the tech bloggers are there." The pavement in front of Delacourt Enterprises was a sea of black lenses and flashing bulbs. The air hummed with the electric static of 1,000 whispers. To the public, this was the climax of a tawdry soap opera, the Viper daughter finally emerging from her hole to spit more venom at the saintly Delacourts. Julian Delacourt watched from his floor-to-ceiling office window 40 stories above, his fingers white-knuckled around a glass of scotch. Beside him, Isabel gripped a lace handkerchief, her eyes fixed on the tiny figure stepping out of a modest black sedan. "She's committing social suicide," Connor sneered, leaning against the mahogany desk. "The more she talks, the more the world hates her. Look at the live stream comments. They're calling for her to be jailed for extortion." Down on the plaza, I didn't look like a viper. I wore a charcoal gray suit, tailored to a surgical edge. My hair was pulled back into a knot, so tight it felt like a second skull. I didn't carry a protest sign. I carried a thin, silver briefcase. I stepped onto the makeshift podium. The noise was deafening. "How does it feel to sue your own mother? Is it true you're a compulsive gambler? Why won't you let Celeste live in peace?" I waited. I didn't ask for silence. I simply stood there until the sheer vacuum of my expression sucked the air out of their lungs. When the only sound left was the distant hum of traffic, I opened the briefcase. 18 years ago, I began, my voice amplified by a dozen microphones. A baby was found in a dumpster behind the St. Jude's medical ward. The police report, which was mysteriously lost 2 weeks later, described the infant as wearing a hand-stitched silk bonnet with the initials AD. I pulled out a yellowed piece of paper, the original police report, recovered from my father's private archives. The Delacourt family has claimed I am a greedy stranger, attempting to extort them. They have portrayed Celeste as the innocent victim of a tragic mistake. But the law doesn't care about portrayals. It cares about paper trails. I looked directly into the main camera of the national news feed. I am not here to ask for the Delacourt's love. I am here to settle a debt. And today, I am calling my first witness. I gestured to the sedan. My father, the retired detective, stepped out. But he wasn't alone. He was leading an elderly woman in a nurse's uniform. She looked terrified, her eyes darting toward the Delacourt Tower. "This is Mrs. Gable," I said, "the head neonatal nurse at St. Jude's in 2008. Mrs. Gable, tell the world, why did the mistake happen?" The woman's voice shook, but the speakers carried it to every corner of the square. "It wasn't a mistake. Mr. Julian Delacourt, he knew the baby had a respiratory complication. He didn't want a broken air. He paid the administrator to declare the child deceased. But I couldn't do it. I couldn't throw her away. I left her where I knew the janitor, a kind man named Mr. Lin, would find her. I thought she'd have a better life with a poor man who wanted her than a rich man who saw her as a defective product." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the sound of 1,000 narratives shattering at once. "That," I said, my voice cutting through the shock like a guillotine, "is the abandonment I mentioned. Now let's talk about the identity theft." I pulled out a second folder. Celeste Delacourt, or should I say, Celeste Vaughn, is the biological daughter of the very administrator Mr. Delacourt bribed. For 18 years, the Delacourts didn't just lose a daughter. They swapped a defective one for a perfect one. They used company funds to educate a child that wasn't theirs, while writing off my death as a tax-deductible charitable donation to a fake foundation. I paused, letting the weight of the words sink in. As of 10 minutes ago, my legal team has filed a RICO suit against Delacorte Enterprises. This isn't just about child support anymore. This is about 18 years of money laundering, bribery, and the systematic erasure of a human being's existence. The fallout was a slow-motion car crash. By that evening, the Celeste Angel hashtag had been replaced by hashtag Delacorte Dumpster. The stock price of Delacorte Enterprises plummeted 40% in after-hours trading. The public, which had so eagerly sharpened their stones to throw at me, now turned their slingshots toward the mansion on the hill. I spent the night in my parents' small kitchen. My mother, her blood pressure finally stabilized, sat across from me, her hands trembling as she held a cup of tea. "Nina," she whispered, "you don't have to do this. We have enough. We don't need their millions." I took her hand. Her skin was rough from years of scrubbing floors, years of working extra shifts to pay for my law school books because she thought I was a genius who deserved the world. "Mom," I said, my eyes burning with a heat I hadn't felt in 2 lifetimes. "This isn't about the money. They tried to buy your silence with a villa. They tried to paint you as a pauper who raised a viper. I'm not just getting my due. I'm getting yours." The next morning, the family of 4 was waiting for me at the mediation center. But the power dynamic had shifted. Julian looked 10 years older. His suit was wrinkled. Isabel sat in the corner, her face buried in her hands, sobbing. Not the elegant, performative sobs from before, but the ragged, ugly sounds of a woman who realized her entire life was built on a foundation of corpses. Connor looked like he wanted to jump across the table, but 2 security guards, hired by my firm, stood behind my chair. And Celeste. She wasn't wearing couture today. She was wearing a simple white dress, trying one last time to look like a victim. But when she looked at me, the mask slipped. Pure, unadulterated hatred burned in her eyes. "You've ruined everything," she hissed. "I was the one who did the work. I was the one who played the piano, who went to the galas, who made this family look good. You were just a ghost in a dumpster." I leaned forward, the legal shark finally baring its teeth. "You weren't a daughter, Celeste. You were a placeholder. And the thing about placeholders is that they are easily deleted." I slid a single piece of paper toward Julian. "This is the settlement. It's no longer $800 million. It's the entire controlling interest of Delacorte Enterprises. You will step down. Connor will be removed from the board. And Celeste." I glanced at her. "The Joe family still wants their healthy bride. Since you're so fond of the Delacorte name, I've arranged for the marriage contract to be finalized. You'll be married by the end of the month." Julian's voice was a ghost of itself. "You'd sell your sister into a marriage for a company?" "I'm not selling her," I replied. "I'm returning her to the system you created. You wanted a daughter who was an asset. Well, she's your only remaining asset. Use her wisely." The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of liquidation and litigation. I didn't take the $800 million for myself. I established the St. Jude's Whistleblower Fund and a foundation for abandoned children. I kept exactly enough to buy my parents the quietest, most beautiful estate in the countryside, the kind with a garden my mother didn't have to work in unless she wanted to. The day of the final signing arrived. The Delacorte mansion was being auctioned off. The powerful family was now a group of people in a rented apartment, facing a mountain of criminal charges for the original bribery and fraud. I met Isabel one last time in the empty foyer of the mansion. "Nina," she reached out, her voice trembling. Could you ever just call me Mother?" I looked at her, the woman who had sat by and watched as they tried to pay me to disappear. I thought of my pauper mother, who had shared her last piece of bread with me when I was 5. "I already have a mother," I said. "She's waiting for me in the car." As I walked down the marble steps, I heard a scream from the upstairs balcony. It was Celeste. She was clutching a wedding dress, her face contorted. The angel had finally fallen into the hell she helped build. I got into the sedan. My father was in the driver's seat, my mother in the back. "Is it over, honey?" my mother asked, her eyes full of concern. I looked back at the Delacourt crest on the gates that were now being chained shut by the bank. I felt the weight of 2 lives finally balance out. The legal shark had finished its meal. Yes, Mom, I said, leaning back and closing my eyes. The debt is paid in full. I had spent 18 years preparing for a war I thought I'd never fight. I had used every trick, every cold-blooded instinct from my past life to dismantle a dynasty. But as we drove away from the wreckage of the Delacourt name, I realized the most legal thing I'd ever done wasn't the lawsuit. It was choosing the family that chose me. The concrete walls of the state correctional facility for women didn't care about thread counts or pedigree. For Isabel Delacourt, the silence was the loudest part. In the mansion, there was always the hum of the central air, the soft footfalls of staff, or the clink of crystal. Here, there was only the rhythmic dripping of a leaky pipe and the occasional metallic clang of a cell door. She sat on her cot, staring at her hands. They were red and raw from kitchen duty. She had spent the morning peeling 50 pounds of potatoes, a task she once would have found beneath her dignity, but now it was the only thing that kept her mind from fracturing. Across the courtyard, in the men's wing, Julian Delacourt sat in a different kind of silence. Julian's fall had been the swiftest. The RICO charges, combined with the unearthed evidence of the 2008 bribery at St. Jude's, had stripped him of every protection. His high-priced lawyers had abandoned him the moment the Delacourt Enterprise accounts were frozen. He was no longer Mr. Delacourt. He was inmate number 88219. Julian spent his days in the prison library, not reading, but staring at the law books he had once manipulated with ease. He tried to draft appeals, his hand shaking as he realized the very precedents he had helped set were now the bars of his own cage. In the corporate world, Julian was a shark. In prison, he was the suit. He was an easy target for those who had lost their homes during the Delacourt housing crisis of 22. He walked with a permanent limp now, the result of a slip in the showers that no guard seemed to witness. Every week, he received a clipped newspaper article from an anonymous sender, me. The articles detailed the rebranding of his company. It was no longer Delacourt Enterprises, it was the Lynn Justice Initiative. His name was being sandblasted off every building in the city. Connor Delacourt fared the worst. Without his father's shadow to hide in or a platinum card to buy loyalty, he was a hollow shell. He had been sentenced to 5 years for his role in the money laundering and the subsequent witness intimidation. My parents' red-painted door had been his undoing. He spent his time in a medium-security facility, where he reportedly picked fights he couldn't win. His face, once the pride of high society magazines, was now a map of scars. He had no visitors. He had no future. He was the viper's brother. And in the ecosystem of the yard, he was at the bottom of the food chain. Isabel was allowed one luxury, a small, cracked mirror in the communal bathroom. Every morning, she looked at the woman staring back. The Botox had faded, the expensive facials were a distant memory, and the grief she had performed for the cameras had finally become real. She was haunted by the nurse's testimony. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw a dumpster in the freezing cold. She saw a silk bonnet with the initials AD. One afternoon, a social worker visited her. "You have a letter, Isabel. From your daughter." Isabel's heart leaped. Nina? Had she finally softened? Was this the olive branch? She tore the envelope open with trembling fingers. But the return address wasn't mine. It was a high-security psychiatric ward. "Mother, the Joes are monsters. They don't want a wife. They want a broodmare. My hair is falling out. They won't let me leave the estate. Why didn't you protect me? You swapped the real one for me, but you didn't check if I was strong enough to survive. I hate you. I hate you more than I hate Nina. Celeste." Isabel collapsed onto the cold floor, the letter fluttering away. She realized then that Nina's revenge wasn't just about the prison bars. It was about leaving them all exactly where they had left her, in a place where no one was coming to save them. Back at the Lynn estate, I sat on the porch with my father. He was cleaning his old service weapon, a habit he couldn't shake even in retirement. My mother was in the garden, humming a song as she pruned the roses. You checked the reports today? My father asked without looking up. I did, I replied, sipping my tea. The Delacourt name is officially extinct. The last of their personal assets were auctioned this morning to pay for the St. Jude's Victim Fund. And the girl? Celeste. She's where she belongs, I said coldly. In a cage of her own making. I looked out over the rolling hills of the countryside. I wasn't a shark anymore. I was just Nina Lynn. I had dragged them through the mud, through the law, and through the fire. And as the sun set, I realized the best part of being reborn wasn't the revenge. It was the fact that for the first time in 2 lives, my conscience was as clear as the evening sky.